the existing academic literature is largely silent on global management issues. And so that's an area. And so what I'm going to do today is just highlight some questions that I think arise from these workplace platforms. You know, when you're managing a global enterprise, there are a number of critical functional management areas that need to be considered. I mean, this is really what CEOs are confronted with thinking about and executing on a day-to-day basis. One is, how do you balance your global versus local sales and marketing? You know, what do you maintain consistent on a global basis, and what do you tailor for the local markets? Another is your supply chain and distribution. Innovation, you know, how do you drive that innovation? Where does that innovation come from? Do you keep it at home, so to speak, or do you engage globally in supporting your innovation processes? And then also, how do you protect your intellectual property on a global basis? And what kind of portfolio do you build, and how do you protect that portfolio? Company culture and leadership. As I mentioned, Rakuten is an e-commerce platform out of Japan. They have decided to make English their language of the company. And so that's one way that you drive a company culture, particularly in a global era, you know, choices of language. How do you create a unique identity? And that's particularly interesting from a platform perspective, given that you're not directly employing many of the workers. As I mentioned, they reside outside of the traditional boundaries of the firm. So how do you drive culture in those contexts? And then you have financial management. You know, how do you run your finances for the company? And then finally, how do you engage with government and the government policy process? So when we look at traditional enterprises, there is a rich literature on this global versus local. Really down the line here, you can go and you can find good articles and courses taught in MBA programs focused on traditional enterprise. But when it comes to platform companies, that's not necessarily the case. So I think some important questions are, what can be drawn from and where do platform companies align with and have similar conditions or capabilities and management issues that are aligned and similar to the traditional enterprises, and where are they different? And why would that cause the platform companies to need to come up with different ways of thinking about these 6 management areas that are critical to being successful driving an international company? So there are lots of management trade-offs always. In fact, that's part of the interest and intrigue of becoming a successful company, is how do you manage these trade-offs well? And one classic trade-off is this integration on a global basis that's standardizing your processes versus local responsiveness. So one way to have very low pressures for globalization and low local responsiveness, and that's essentially, you know, traditionally a company that would be domestic and they would just take that domestic product and sell whatever they had on the global basis. So there would be no tailoring to other country markets. You would just basically sell as is. So that's one way to think about it. Another is to encourage a lot more local autonomy. So you set up operations in other countries and you give those local managers a lot of autonomy. And what's interesting is in hotel chains, for example, typically gave their local managers a lot of discretion in how they marketed their hotels and how they provided services to customers that were in line with local needs. Another is to maximize world scale, which is to have a common brand and a common set of products in which you don't tailor at all. And then finally, is a more balanced approach where you find those areas where it makes sense to have consistency on a global basis, but also find areas where you can tailor those products. Just to highlight an example, going back to the hotel chains, hotels chains were finding that the local hotels were developing their own apps for customers. But that was leading to a proliferation. So you can imagine a large hotel chain like Marriott or Hyatt. If you had all your different hotels in different countries building your different applications, you're going to have lots of inconsistencies in customer experience from country to country potentially. And so in that instance, we're seeing a case where the hotel chains are now, the headquarters is asserting themselves in creating much more standardized applications across. And there's a lot of innovation taking place right now with building apps for hotels, stays, and in that customer engagement, where you could see eventually the elimination of those card keys that you get when you check in. All of that will be handled through an app that can be tailored to that particular person, and lots of additional services added into that. So interesting example. There are many, many others that apply in this space. So thinking about the unique situation and conditions of platform companies, understanding how they're going to handle these trade-offs is one area that we're quite interested in exploring further and interested in your questions. One example of a company that has a global mission to grow is Rocket Internet out of Berlin. In fact, this comes right off of their landing page of their website, which is to become the world's largest internet platform outside the United States and China. And they're growing quite dramatically. So they're an interesting case study on this issue of what do you maintain as consistent across your business, but also how do you tailor for the local market? And so one of the markets that Rocket is very active in right now is building out their presence in Africa. And what they're doing is they're playing the role of investor. And so they're investing actively in a whole host of platform companies across Africa. And here's a map I created with some data that I was able to acquire about their operations. And they've set up an integration company called the Africa Internet Group, which shares some common IT platforms, but then gives a fair amount of autonomy to those local companies to execute. And so Jumia is an e-commerce platform. It's active in 8 countries across Africa. Easy Taxi is in 4, which is similar to an Uber. Jivago is a hotel matching. If you're looking for a hotel in Africa, Jivago is a good place to go. So anyway, there's a whole host of these companies. And so Rocket is one interesting example of a company that is trying to execute and manage the correct and find that right balance between being global as well as local at the same time.